Hello, my name is Edna. I'm 68 years old, and I want to tell you about a moment that changed everything. I was on a family vacation with my daughter-in-law's family when a vicious storm hit. Rain cut through the air like needles, and the wind howled so fiercely it seemed to shake the very trees around us. At the exact moment they were leaving, my daughter-in-law shoved me and my dog Winston out of the cabin with brutal force. I stood there drenched, shivering, feeling discarded like trash while she spat, "If you want, walk back with that filthy dog," and slammed the door behind us. I could hardly believe the cruelty. But what she didn't know was that every car key was clenched tightly in my pocket, and I wasn't powerless at all. It was a moment that could have broken me, but instead it sparked something inside, a mixture of determination, anger, and a quiet resolve to take back control of my life. Winston pressed close, trembling like me, but together we faced the storm, both outside and within. What happened next changed everything for us, revealing secrets, courage, and a plan no one could have expected. The question is, how did I turn this betrayal into a story of strength and justice? But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how the story really began. I remember that day as if it had been etched into my bones, every detail sharper than the last. The storm had arrived without warning, a cruel companion to the already tense energy that had been simmering between us. I had been looking forward to the family vacation, naive as always, thinking perhaps a few days in the Smoky Mountains would bring us closer, at least a little. But as soon as we arrived, I could feel the cold distance emanating from Sarah, my daughter-in-law. And that day, that vicious, heartless day, it became terrifyingly clear just how little she cared for anyone but herself. The wind tore through the trees, bending their skeletal branches in impossible angles, making the cabin tremble under the assault. Rain stabbed the windows like 1,000 tiny knives, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof. I had just finished unpacking Winston's small blanket in a corner of the living room when Sarah's voice cut through the roar, sharp and commanding, dripping with disdain. "Edna, that's enough. We're leaving, and if you want to come along, don't forget your dog. You better move fast." I froze, uncertainty and disbelief mingling with a flash of indignation. She wasn't joking. She meant every word. Before I could respond, before I could even comprehend the cruelty, she seized the moment to act. With a sudden shove, she pushed both Winston and me out the door. The slam of the cabin door echoed in my chest like a physical blow, and the storm seemed to laugh at me as it welcomed us with open arms. I felt the cold immediately, seeping through my thin coat, chilling me to my core. Winston whined, his small body trembling against mine. I clutched him tightly, feeling the rapid thrum of his heart mirroring the surge of my own. The wind ripped my hair across my face, stinging my cheeks, and the rain soaked me instantly. I could barely breathe against the sharp, cutting needles of water, and I shivered uncontrollably. I wasn't just cold, I was wounded, humiliated, and furious. Yet every instinct screamed that I could not, would not break down in front of her. I glanced back at the cabin through the sheets of rain, spotting David standing frozen, torn between the woman he had married and the mother he had abandoned. His face, pale and drawn, betrayed a helplessness I had never wanted to see. For a brief, fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sorrow, but it was quickly smothered by the realization of betrayal so deep, so unnecessary, it burned hotter than the storm itself. He had allowed this to happen. He had allowed his wife to treat me like refuse. I tightened my arms around Winston and began walking, each step a struggle through the mud and waterlogged leaves. My boots sank into the earth and I cursed quietly, not out of anger at nature, but at the unrelenting injustice that had forced me into this battle. The rain plastered my clothes to my body, soaked my hair, and turned my glasses into a blur of water. But Winston remained steadfast in my arms, his warm, loyal little body a comforting weight against my chest. I whispered softly to him, "It's okay, my boy. We'll be all right, I promise." We huddled behind a massive pine, trying to shield ourselves from the worst of the storm. But it was useless. The wind tore through the forest, whistling between the trunks and carrying a chill that seemed to reach into my bones. My teeth chattered despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Winston nuzzled my shoulders, shivering violently, and I realized that I had to find shelter and fast. My mind raced, recalling the grounds, the paths we had passed upon arrival. There it was! A small maintenance shed I had almost forgotten, nestled about 100 yards into the woods. I moved as fast as I could, the mud sucking at my boots, the rain burning my eyes. Winston whimpered, but I whispered constant reassurances, my voice steadier than I felt. Finally, we reached the shed. The rusted padlock yielded to my efforts, and we slipped inside just as the storm seemed to intensify. The interior smelled of damp wood and disuse, but it was dry, and that was all that mattered. I spread the blankets I found, wrapping us both up, trying to create a small sanctuary against the merciless elements outside. Winston's breathing slowed, the tension easing slightly as he nestled into the folds of the cloth, his body warm against mine. For a moment, I let myself feel relief. I allowed a single, quiet breath to escape me, a fragile acknowledgement that we had survived the worst of it together. And in that silence, I felt the rawness of my anger, the ache of betrayal, and the sharp sting of humiliation, mingled with the fierce, unyielding love I carried for my son and my steadfast little bulldog. I may have been 68, soaked to the bone, trembling with cold, but I was far from defeated. Far from it, because kindness had not failed me. Cruelty had only revealed itself, and it would meet its reckoning soon enough. And then, as the storm howled with renewed ferocity outside, I remembered something. Buried deep in my coat pocket, clutched tightly in my hand, were all the car keys. Every single one. Their arrogance, their cruelty, they had underestimated me. But that, I realized, would be their first mistake. I pulled Winston closer, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. His small eyes met mine, filled with unwavering trust, and I whispered softly, "We'll show them, my boy. We'll show them all." And for the first time that day, I felt a spark of hope ignite amidst the storm. The rain may have lashed at us, the wind may have tried to break our spirits, but we were still standing, and we always would be. My first thought, even before I registered the cold piercing through my thin coat, was Winston. My little bulldog, loyal to the core, was shivering uncontrollably in my arms, his tiny body trembling as if the storm outside had seeped into his very bones. I pressed him closer to me, letting the warmth of my own body try to seep into his soaked fur, and whispered softly, "It's okay, my boy. It's okay. We'll be all right." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, but the tremor of fear and cold danced just beneath the surface. I could feel his heart racing against mine, a frantic rhythm that mirrored my own inner panic. Every inch of him was soaked, his stubby legs slipping against my coat as he clung to me, desperate for comfort, and I vowed silently that I would not let him down. The wind lashed against us with a vicious intensity, whipping my hair into my face and stabbing at my exposed skin. The rain had soaked me through in moments, leaving me shivering, teeth chattering, and soaked to the bone. Every raindrop felt like a needle, every gust of wind a force trying to throw me off balance. I felt the mud sucking at my boots, the water rising around the base of the tree, pooling and running between my feet. Yet through all of it, my focus remained on Winston. His small body was frail against the elements, but his trust in me was absolute, unwavering. That trust became a weight, but also a shield, fortifying me against despair. Sarah's cruelty had always been there, simmering beneath her polite facade, but today it was raw, exposed, and merciless. She had pushed us into the storm without a shred of hesitation, a calculated act that struck at my heart. David, my son, just stood there, frozen, eyes downcast, as if the storm had frozen him too. He didn't move to stop her, didn't protest, didn't even glance at me with concern. My heart ached, not just for the indignity of being discarded, but for the quiet complicity of the boy I had raised. Tears threatened to spill, not just for the cold or the wet, but for the stark betrayal, for the realization that kindness could be so violently misread as weakness. I took a long, deliberate breath, feeling the storm press against me, feeling Winston's tiny, warm body wriggling against mine, and fought to push back the rising tide of tears and rage. Pity would not warm us. Complaining would not shield us. The only path forward was action, and I had to find shelter before the storm claimed more than just our comfort. Memories flickered through my mind, a small, nearly forgotten maintenance shed, abandoned and overlooked, sitting quietly about 100 yards into the woods. I remembered walking past it the first day we arrived, noticing its rusted roof, the flaking paint, and the sagging door. It seemed insignificant then, just a piece of property tucked away in the forest. But now, it became a lifeline, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. I adjusted Winston in my arms, holding him as close as possible, feeling his shivers slowly transmit into my chest, fueling a fiery determination. "Hold on, boy." "Almost there," I murmured, my words swallowed by the roar of the wind and rain. Every step through the mud was a battle. My boots sank deep, threatening to tip me over, and the storm clawed at me from all sides. But Winston's little face, wet and streaked with mud, staring up at me with trust and unspoken courage, gave me strength. I pushed forward, one soaked, slipping step at a time, refusing to let exhaustion or fear dictate my pace. Finally, I saw it. The shed. Its door sagged under the weight of years, paint peeling in jagged strips. The lock rusted and useless against the persistence of my determination. I fumbled with the padlock, the metal slicked in my fingers, until it gave way with a sharp, metallic click. Relief washed over me in a warm, quiet wave, though I couldn't let myself relax entirely. Not yet. I opened the door and stepped inside, cradling Winston as the dry air greeted us like a soft embrace. The space smelled of damp wood and forgotten years, but it was a sanctuary, a shield from the storm's wrath. I set Winston down gently, letting him shake off some of the water, and then rummaged through the shadows until I found old blankets. They were thin, worn, but better than nothing. I wrapped us both carefully, feeling the slowly returning warmth seep into our chilled bodies. Winston nestled close, his small body finally easing into a rhythmic, calm breathing. I pressed my cheek to his fur, inhaling the scent of wet dog mixed with the familiar, comforting aroma of home. My tears, finally released, were quiet and soaked into the folds of the blanket as I whispered apologies for not being able to protect him sooner. For a brief, fleeting moment, I allowed myself a glimmer of relief. We were safe, if only temporarily. My body still shook, but my mind began to clear, the cold and fear giving way to a quiet, smoldering resolve. This storm, Sarah's cruelty, David's inaction, they could not break us. Winston's trust was a tether, grounding me, reminding me that even in the most merciless conditions, love could endure. And then, just as we began to settle into the dry sanctuary, a sound cut through the relative calm, frantic shouting, muffled by the sheets of rain, but unmistakably human. My heart sank, realizing with a jolt that they were back. The very people who had cast us into the storm, who had tried to break me, were returning. My first instinct was fear, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet, firm determination. We had weathered this first assault. We could weather the next. I clutched Winston closer, feeling his small heartbeat steady against mine, and whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." I stood in that shed, water dripping from my hair, blankets clinging to my body, the storm raging outside. And for the first time that day, I felt an unshakable truth settle within me. We were survivors. We were unbroken. And we would not just endure, we would reclaim what was ours. The darkness outside pressed in like a living thing, heavy and suffocating, the storm raging around us with relentless fury. My senses had grown attuned to every creak of the trees, every gust of wind, every raindrop that splashed against the roof of the shed. I held Winston tightly in my arms, feeling the small, rapid heartbeat beneath my hand, and whispered softly, "We've made it this far, my boy. Just a little longer." His warm, wet nose nudged my chest in response, as if acknowledging the comfort and reassurance I offered. He was exhausted, yet he remained steadfast, his trust in me unwavering, a constant anchor in the chaos surrounding us. Then a beam of light cut through the darkness like a blade, sharp and invasive. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as it landed squarely on the shed's wooden door. The light trembled as it approached, and with a sudden, forceful motion, the door flew open. Water and wind spilled in with the movement, and I was momentarily blinded by the harsh glare. When my eyes adjusted, I saw her, Sarah, standing there, a tempest of fury and entitlement, her wet hair plastered to her face, her clothes clinging to her body from the storm. Behind her, almost shrinking into the shadows, was David, my son, his face pale, eyes downcast. Shame and indecision etched into every line. "Give me the keys, Edna," Sarah demanded, her voice cutting through the storm like a sharpened knife, sharp with anger, but devoid of genuine concern. My chest tightened, and for a moment I felt the old ache, the sting of being dismissed, of being underestimated. I met her gaze, then turned slowly to David, searching his eyes for any spark of the son I had known, the boy who had once held my hand and trusted me completely. His gaze flickered, shame briefly surfacing before being swallowed again by fear and guilt. "Is that all you have to say to me?" I asked quietly, my voice controlled but heavy with an unyielding weight. The wind rattled against the shed, and Winston pressed closer, sensing my tension. David mumbled something incoherent, words swallowed by the storm and by his own hesitation. "It was very clear," I replied, my voice hard as stone, every syllable deliberate, carrying the weight of years of patience and now the fire of righteous anger. "You can have your keys when the sun comes up, and after you apologize to me and to Winston." Sarah's lip curled, an expression of disdain that made my blood boil. "You'll freeze out here, you old fool!" She spat, a mixture of mockery and genuine fear lacing her words. And then, just as abruptly as she had appeared, she slammed the door, the sound resonating through the storm, a declaration of temporary retreat. They believed they could outlast me, that their arrogance and cruelty would wear me down until I relented. They believed I was fragile, dispensable, weak. I shifted Winston slightly in my arms, feeling the subtle tremors in his body, and pressed my cheek to his fur. His trust was absolute, and it gave me the clarity I needed. I reached into my bag, sliding my hand past the familiar weight of the car keys, past the small mementos I always carried, until my fingers closed around the cold, technological reassurance of my satellite phone. It was heavy in my hand, a lifeline that connected me not just to the world beyond this storm, but to the means of reclaiming control over a situation that had been spiraling into chaos for far too long. My hands, wet and chilled, fumbled slightly as I dialed, the familiar motions grounding me. I didn't call the police, not yet. That would have been reactive, desperate. I called my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, the man who had always been steady, unflappable, a strategic mind in the midst of life's unpredictable tempests. "Hello, James," I said, my voice calm, the storm outside muffling some of the tension. but not all. I need you to do something for me. I explained the situation succinctly, carefully selecting each word, ensuring clarity despite the chaos surrounding me. His silence on the other end was brief but potent, filled with the weight of processing what he knew would require swift, decisive action. Then, the sound of keys tapping across a keyboard, the low hum of activity through the phone line, and finally, his voice. "Edna, are you at the cabin in the Smoky Mountains? The one registered under your name?" "Yes," I replied, feeling the first spark of control flicker within me. "The vacation I paid for, in the cabin I own." My words were deliberate, steady, filled with the calm authority of someone who had endured too much to be dismissed or underestimated. I instructed him to begin eviction proceedings against David and Sarah from the house they currently occupied, another property I owned, one that had been entrusted to them under the assumption of familial loyalty and respect. "Consider it done," he said, the authority in his voice matching my own inner resolve. Then, after a brief pause, he added quietly, almost cautiously, "Edna, there's something else. I ran a check on your joint accounts last week as you asked. It seems David has been making some significant withdrawals." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding, mixing with the howling wind and the relentless drum of rain on the roof. I tightened my grip on Winston, feeling the tiny, steady pulse of his heart against my chest, a reminder that we were not alone in this fight. My mind raced, not with fear, but with strategy. The storm outside seemed to pale against the storm I was about to unleash within the confines of truth and accountability. Sarah and David thought they could scare me into submission with brute force and arrogance. They were about to learn, in no uncertain terms, that the spirit of a mother and the bond between a woman and her loyal companion could not be broken. I looked down at Winston, his small, damp eyes locking onto mine, and whispered, "We've got this, boy. They'll see. They'll understand." And for the first time that night, amidst the chaos, the cold, and the fury, I felt the smallest but most powerful glimmer of hope, the knowledge that I was no longer the victim of their cruelty, but the quiet professional preparing to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling like an ancient, merciless creature, and the rain pounded against the roof of the shed with a steady, unrelenting fury. The small space was damp, the wooden walls creaking under the assault. Yet inside, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Winston lay nestled against my chest, his small body quivering slightly, and I pressed my hand to his fur, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat slow, syncing with mine. The storm outside was loud, chaotic, and threatening, but in that moment, I knew that panic would achieve nothing. Anger and despair were natural, yes, but they were not solutions. Action was. I reached into my bag, passed the keys that I had held onto like talismans, and retrieved my satellite phone. Its cold, solid weight in my hand felt reassuring. A lifeline in the darkness, a tool of control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond what I had expected. I did not call the police. That would have been reactive, desperate, a surrender to the chaos rather than a command over it. No, I would do this on my own terms, quietly, strategically, as I had faced every storm in my life. "Hello, James," I said, my voice steady, calm, carrying the quiet authority that only comes from experience, from having weathered countless personal tempests and survived. Winston pressed closer, as if sensing the gravity of what I was about to do. "I need you to do something for me." His silence on the other end was deliberate, thoughtful, a brief pause that felt long only because my mind was already racing ahead. I explained the situation succinctly, but with enough detail to ensure there would be no misunderstanding. The storm outside seemed to fade in comparison to the storm of thoughts spinning inside my head. David and Sarah's cruelty had pushed me to this point, and I would no longer tolerate being underestimated, dismissed, or manipulated. Then, after a quiet moment, I heard the sound of his fingers typing across a keyboard, the low hum of deliberate, professional action. "Edna," he said, voice calm but edged with surprise, "are you at the cabin in the Smoky Mountains? The one registered under your name?" "Yes," I confirmed, my voice carrying the weight of unshakable certainty. "The very one. The vacation I paid for in the cabin I own. Every detail of this trip is mine, and I intend to reclaim it." Winston nudged my arm with his wet nose, and I felt a surge of determination. His trust in me was absolute, and I could not fail him, not now, not ever. I instructed James to begin eviction proceedings against David and Sarah for the house they were living in. This was another property I owned, one they had been given access to under the assumption of familial respect and loyalty. It was mine, every brick, every nail, every room, and they had treated it, and me, with disregard. "Consider it done," he said after a pause, the sound of the keys resuming on the other end a subtle but affirming rhythm. "Edna, there's something else. I ran a check on your joint accounts last week as you asked. It seems David has been making some significant withdrawals." My breath caught at the words, a mix of shock, betrayal, and the grim satisfaction of uncovering the truth. Winston's small body shifted, sensing the tension radiating from me, and I hugged him tighter. The betrayal cut deeper than the storm, deeper than the wind or the rain or the cold that had seeped into my bones. My son had taken advantage of my trust, using my own resources against me, all while pretending to care. Anger surged, but I tempered it, letting it fuel clarity instead of chaos. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling the damp, earthy smell of the shed, the faint scent of wet dog mingling with the musty wood. I pictured David, unaware of the reckoning that was quietly, inexorably approaching. I imagined the consequences of his actions unfolding with deliberate precision, not as a punishment born of rage, but as the natural, unavoidable result of deceit and greed. I was not vindictive. I was just... And for the first time that night, I felt the sweet, steady pulse of power that comes from reclaiming one's agency. Winston's small, warm body pressed against me, and I whispered, "We'll fix this, my boy. You'll see. It's going to be all right." His trust, his unwavering presence anchored me, reminding me that I was not just fighting for myself, but for him, for the loyalty and love that we shared. The storm outside no longer felt like a threat. It was merely noise, a backdrop to the quiet, strategic assertion of my rights. I thought of the long, sleepless nights, the quiet moments of fear and doubt, the tiny indignities I had endured silently, all building toward this moment of clarity. I realized that strength was not loud or brash, it was deliberate, thoughtful, and often invisible until the consequences became undeniable. This was my moment of quiet power, of patient, steady vindication. I hung up the phone, the words of James lingering in my mind, confirming the first steps toward justice. I felt the weight of anticipation, the small but growing sense of triumph that comes from knowing the truth, from uncovering the hidden currents that had threatened to sweep us away. I held Winston close, feeling his slow, calm breathing. And for the first time that night, I allowed a small, quiet smile to touch my lips. We had weathered the storm so far, and now we had a plan, a path forward. The night was still dark, the wind still screamed, the rain still pelted the shed, but inside, I felt a fire begin to burn, a fire of resolve, of dignity, of unwavering belief in what was right. I pressed my cheek against Winston's fur, whispering once more, "We'll rise, my boy. We'll rise stronger than ever." And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that the storm outside could not touch the strength that we had found within ourselves. By morning, the storm had spent its fury. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, the clouds parting just enough for pale streaks of sunlight to pierce the gray sky. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, heavy and raw, a scent that somehow felt cleansing after the chaos of the night. I could hear it before I even saw it, the low, persistent rumble of a heavy engine, a tow truck. Sarah had called for help. My stomach tightened, not with fear this time, but with a mixture of disbelief and quiet anticipation. I adjusted the blankets around Winston and tucked him closer, feeling his small, wet body tremble with excitement and residual shivers. He was ready, more alert than I had seen him in hours, as if sensing the tide was about to turn. I took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling my lungs, and stepped out of the shed. Mud squelched beneath my boots, the ground still soft and uneven from the storm, but I walked steadily. Winston trotted beside me, his small paws patting confidently over the slick terrain. He was my anchor, my reminder that no matter the cruelty we had endured, we had survived together. Ahead, the tow truck driver was hooking up Sarah's expensive sous vide, his movements careful and deliberate. He was a kind-faced man, older, with lines etched into his face from years of work and weather, eyes that carried patience and a quiet wisdom. He looked up as I approached, and I felt a surge of resolve. This was my moment, my reclamation, and I would not falter. "I'm the owner of this property," I said, my voice calm but firm, carrying across the puddled yard and the hushed remnants of the storm. I showed him my driver's license, then slid a digital copy of the deed across my phone screen for him to see. "And I do not authorize any vehicles to be removed." The driver paused, his eyes scanning the documents, and then slowly, with deliberate respect, he tipped his hat and unhooked the car. A wave of relief surged through me, but it was tempered by the sharp, cold sting of satisfaction at seeing Sarah's expression. She was speechless, fury flashing across her face, eyes wide with disbelief, lips pressed tight as if words could not form fast enough to match her outrage. I felt no triumph in the cruelty of the moment, only the quiet, potent sense of justice that comes when the truth stands unshakable. David finally found his voice, his words hesitant at first, fragile like the broken branches under our feet. "Mom, just give us the keys. This has gone far enough." The pain in his voice was palpable, a mixture of fear, shame, and uncertainty. I stopped walking, turning slowly to face him. My heart ached, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization of how far he had strayed from the person I had raised him to be. I looked into his eyes, searching for the son who had once run to me with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks, for the boy who had trusted me implicitly. A deep sadness washed over me, but it was mingled with clarity, with the quiet understanding that love alone was not enough to prevent wrongdoing. "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but clear and deliberate, carrying just enough to reach everyone standing around. "I know what you did with the retirement fund." His face drained of color, the words landing with the weight of a truth he could no longer avoid. Winston pressed his small head against my leg, his soft, damp fur brushing against my hand, and I felt a wave of solace in that tiny, unwavering connection. My son's shame was raw, his posture collapsing inward, shoulders heavy with the burden of guilt. He opened his mouth, searching for excuses, for justification, for the words that could undo what could not be undone. Sarah's hands shot up in protest, her voice rising, harsh and frantic. "He was providing for us. Something you know nothing about." But the words fell flat, carrying no weight in the presence of fact, of proof, of truth. I let her speak, letting the weight of her desperation and deceit fill the silence between the drops of rain still falling around us. The sun, shy and tentative, broke through the clouds in pale streaks of gold, illuminating the wet earth, the tense tableau, and Winston, who now stood proudly beside me, his chest puffed out as if he too understood the gravity of the moment. There was a strange, quiet dignity in that scene, despite the tension. A sense that the universe had paused long enough to let justice be witnessed. I remained calm, letting the silence stretch, letting the morning air carry the unspoken weight of accountability. Sarah's eyes flickered, confusion and fear battling with the anger she had worn like armor. David's gaze fell to the ground, unmoving, as if the earth itself could swallow him, and I felt a pang of sorrow for the son who had made grievous mistakes, yet who still had the capacity for redemption. I inhaled deeply, savoring the damp, fresh air, the quiet after the storm, and whispered to Winston, "We're not just surviving, boy. We're reclaiming what's ours, and we'll make sure the truth is seen." His small tail thumped the ground in agreement. A subtle but steady beat of loyalty and courage that reminded me why I had endured the storm in the first place. This morning, with the tow truck silent, Sarah's fury exposed, and David's shame raw and visible, I felt a profound sense of agency, of reclaiming not just property but dignity. The storm had tested us, but it had not defeated us. It had stripped away pretenses, revealed intentions, and left only truth and trust. The trust between a woman and her loyal companion, unwavering and eternal. And as I stood there, mud-caked and soaked, with Winston at my side, I realized the depth of what we had survived. We had faced betrayal, cruelty, and deception, yet here we were, intact, strong, and resolute. The world might have tried to bend us, but it had not broken us. And in that moment, I knew that we could endure anything, and that the storm, both outside and within, was finally behind us. The color drained from David's face so quickly, it was almost as if the storm had pulled the life from him. His eyes, wide and uncomprehending, darted to mine for some hint of reassurance, some lifeline to cling to, but I offered none. There was no comfort to be found in the truth I was about to lay bare. Winston pressed closer to my leg, his body tense, alert, sensing the tension radiating from me and my son alike. The early morning sunlight glinted off his damp fur, and he stood as my silent witness, unwavering, loyal, and completely attuned to my emotions. From the porch, Sarah's parents looked on, their expressions etched with confusion, a mixture of concern and disbelief. "What is she talking about, David?" his father-in-law asked, his voice cracking slightly. The lines of age and experience softening in a rare moment of vulnerability. He looked at me then, his gaze flicking between fatherly curiosity and the suspicion that something had gone terribly wrong beneath the surface of their children's seemingly perfect life. I didn't wait for David's answer. There was no point. His hesitation, the small tremor of fear that ran through him, spoke louder than any words he could muster. I took a step closer, my boots squelching in the soft mud, and let the weight of my gaze anchor him in place. "Your loving wife needed a new car, new furniture, and designer clothes, didn't she, David?" I said, each word deliberate, slow, leaving no space for escape. "And you were happy to provide, using the money I've been saving for your future, thinking I was too old, too stupid, too weak to notice." The silence that followed was deafening. David's mouth opened once, then closed. He searched for something, an excuse, a denial, a lie, but found only truth staring back at him. His shoulders sagged and his gaze dropped to the ground, the weight of revelation pressing him into the wet earth beneath our feet. Winston nudged my leg again, soft and insistent, grounding me, reminding me that despite the betrayal, we were still together, unbroken. Sarah, of course, could not remain silent. Her voice, shrill and defensive, cut through the morning air like glass breaking. He was providing for his family. "Something you know nothing about," she insisted, stepping forward, her wet hair clinging to her face, her expression a mixture of indignation and panic. She gestured wildly toward David as if he were a shield, a scapegoat for her own calculated deceit. I let her speak, not out of hesitation, but out of clarity. People reveal themselves through desperation, and the truth is often most visible in the chaos of their defense. I listened to her flailing explanations, the hollow justifications that dripped with arrogance and entitlement, each word only serving to solidify the reality that I had known all along. Her cries for understanding were meaningless against the weight of reality, the quiet power of evidence and fact. Finally, when her voice faded into breathless, flustered silence, I turned my attention back to David. His gaze remained fixed on the ground, shame heavy upon him, but there was a flicker, faint but undeniable, a trace of the boy I had raised, still capable of remorse, still capable of learning, still capable of facing truth with courage. I knelt slightly to meet him on his level, my hand resting briefly on his shoulder. Not to comfort him, but to anchor him, to remind him that while I was angry, my love was not extinguished. "She's quite a catch, David," I said softly, but the words carried a weight that made the air between us tremble. A woman from a wealthy family with a large inheritance coming her way. At least, that's what she told you, isn't it? I let the words hang in the damp morning air, each syllable carefully measured, resonating with the quiet authority of someone who has been wronged but refuses to be broken. His face twitched, a muscle in his jaw working as he struggled to respond, to process, to reconcile the image of the woman he thought he knew with the reality that had been hidden from him until now. Winston sat back on his haunches, his ears flicking toward David, his eyes steady and patient, as if offering silent counsel. Face the truth, make amends, start again. I stepped closer, the mud sucking at my boots, feeling the raw earth beneath me and the weight of years pressing down, reminding me that time and trust are not limitless. I inhaled slowly, the smell of wet pine and rain grounding me, centering me, giving clarity to the storm of emotions swirling around us. David's shoulders twitched, a hesitant acknowledgement of guilt. A tremor that spoke of a son who was starting to understand the consequences of his actions. And then, as if the universe itself had paused for this moment of reckoning, I felt the weight lift slightly from my chest. Not the burden of betrayal that remained, but the knowledge that truth had a voice, and that even in the aftermath of deceit, redemption was possible if faced with honesty and accountability. I glanced down at Winston, brushing my hand along his damp back, and whispered, "We'll get through this, boy. We always do." The early morning light, weak but insistent, broke through the lingering clouds, casting pale gold across the wet landscape. It illuminated the shame etched into David's posture, the shock frozen on Sarah's face, and the quiet, unwavering dignity I carried in my own stance. I felt a subtle shift, a gentle turning of the tide. The storm had tested us, the storm had wounded us, but it had not destroyed us. It had revealed the depth of human frailty, yes, but also the enduring strength of love, loyalty, and truth. I took a slow, deliberate step back, giving David space to absorb what he had heard, to wrestle with the reality of his choices. And for the first time that morning, I allowed a small, quiet sense of hope to stir within me. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was clear. Justice was not born of fury, but of clarity. Redemption was not born of ignorance, but of acknowledgement. And as Winston leaned against my leg, steady and patient, I knew that together we would face whatever came next with integrity, with courage, and with the quiet power of hearts that refused to be broken. A flicker of fear crossed Sarah's face, subtle at first. Barely a twitch of her lips and a slight narrowing of her eyes, but I saw it instantly. The bravado she had carried like armor throughout the morning arrogance, masquerading as confidence cracked. Just for a moment, revealing the vulnerability beneath. I knew I had her. I had always known how to read people, the careful study of expressions, the tiny tells that betray intentions, and in that moment, Sarah's facade was shattered. My heart, which had been so heavy with anger, betrayal, and exhaustion, felt a little lighter. The oppressive weight of injustice I had carried all these years didn't disappear. Of course, but I could sense it loosening, just enough to let clarity and purpose flow in. This wasn't simply about revenge. It never had been. Revenge is hollow, transient, and ultimately unsatisfying. This was about truth, about the revelation of what had been hidden in plain sight, about justice, not the loud, punitive kind, but the quiet, undeniable kind that settles the heart once it has spoken its piece. "You see," I said, my voice steady, calm, and deliberate. After my money started disappearing, I got curious. The words hung in the damp morning air, slicing through the tension like a knife through fog. The small audience, the remnants of this fractured family, leaned in, their expressions a mixture of dread and disbelief. David, his head still bowed, looked small and fragile, like a boy caught in a storm far larger than he could control. Winston pressed against my leg, his steady presence a reminder that I was not alone, that we had weathered worse and come out intact. "I hired a private investigator," I continued, watching the subtle reactions on each face. Eyes widened, mouths parted, disbelief rippling like waves through the group. I let them feel the weight of anticipation, letting the silence stretch, giving the truth time to find its mark. The storm inside the shed, outside, and in our hearts had been fierce, but now, here, clarity reigned. And then, with careful precision, I revealed the truth that would shatter their illusions. "Sarah doesn't come from money," I said, watching her shoulders stiffen, her fingers clenching and unclenching as if she were trying to hold herself together. "In fact, she's in over $100,000 of debt. There is no inheritance. It was all a lie to get you to marry her, David. A lie to get her hands on my money." The words landed with a precision born of years of experience, each syllable weighted, deliberate, irrevocable. David's head jerked up slightly, his eyes meeting mine, a flicker of horror and disbelief passing through him, mingled with the first stirring of comprehension. Winston let out a low, approving huff at my feet, a subtle reminder that the loyalty between us, the bond we shared, had endured everything the night had thrown at us. Sarah's parents stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Their expressions twisted between shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that the daughter they had believed to be innocent, clever, and resourceful was instead a woman who had built her life upon deception and lies. Her mother's face paled, her hands trembling, while her father's jaw tightened as he took in the gravity of what I had just disclosed. I wasn't finished. The most damning revelation remained, and I delivered it with quiet, unflinching precision. I looked directly at her father, the authority in my gaze unyielding, unwavering. "Sir," I said softly, my voice carrying over the remnants of the storm and the tension still lingering in the air. "I suggest you check your credit report, because she also forged your signature on a loan application 6 months ago." The words struck like lightning. His hand shot to his face, a mixture of disbelief and horror, and I felt a bittersweet satisfaction. Not pleasure, certainly not in the way one feels at another's pain, but a quiet, profound sense of justice. This was the moment when truth finally cut through the fog of deceit. The air between us seemed to vibrate, taut with the tension of revelation. David's knees buckled slightly as the weight of this truth pressed down on him. He had been complicit, unaware of the full scope, but the implications were undeniable. Winston nudged me again, soft and reassuring, a reminder that amidst the ruin of lies, there remained something unshakable. Loyalty, trust, love. My gaze swept over the small crowd, noting each expression, the horror, the confusion, the dawning understanding, and I felt an unexpected sense of catharsis begin to build. I took a step closer to Sarah, my wet boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, and looked into her eyes, steady and unwavering. I saw panic, anger, and desperation swirling within them. But I also saw fear, the fear of exposure, of accountability, of having every calculated move revealed for what it truly was. And in that fear, I found my own resolve strengthening. This was more than vindication. This was the illumination of truth, the unearthing of reality from beneath layers of lies. I pressed my hand to Winston's head, feeling the warmth and loyalty radiating from him, grounding me, reminding me that the path forward was not vengeance, but integrity. "We endure, my boy," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "and we rise from the storm." The light shifted slightly, softening as the sun edged further above the horizon, casting pale gold across the wet, muddy landscape. The storm, both literal and metaphorical, had passed, leaving behind clarity and a sense of renewal. Sarah's defenses had crumbled, David's illusions shattered, and her parents, confronted with undeniable proof, were forced to reckon with the reality of who their daughter truly was. And as I looked down at Winston, who wagged his tail with quiet approval and nuzzled my hand, I felt a profound sense of peace for the first time that morning. The reckoning had been delivered, the truth had spoken, and now the path to resolution, redemption, accountability, and rebuilding was open. For in the end, it was never about punishment. It was about truth, about clarity, about facing the storm with courage and emerging with dignity intact. And as the early morning light touched the treetops, illuminating the aftermath of the night's chaos, I knew that we, Winston and I, would endure, would heal, and would rise stronger than we had ever been before. Utter chaos erupted around me, a maelstrom of raw, unfiltered emotion that seemed to rise from the ground itself, fueled by lies unraveling and truth being exposed. Sarah's mother collapsed onto the porch railing, her body shaking with sobs that racked her small frame. I could see every tremor, every quiver of despair, and I felt a pang of something strange, an echo of sympathy even in the midst of so much deceit. It was the kind of crying that is born from shock, from disbelief, from the realization that the life one believed to be solid, trustworthy, and reliable is nothing but a fragile, crumbling illusion. Her father was standing stiffly beside her, his face flushed with anger and confusion, veins visible at his temples, hands clenched in fists that betrayed both frustration and a desperate need for understanding. "Sarah, explain yourself. How could you do this?" he yelled, voice raw with panic and outrage. His eyes darted between his daughter and the wreckage of what had been a carefully constructed family narrative. I saw his pain, the tremor in his jaw, the slight quiver in his otherwise commanding posture. It was a man confronted with betrayal not just from a stranger, but from the child he had raised, the woman he had trusted. David looked like a ghost, pale, hunched, almost unreal in his shock, as if his body had absorbed the trauma of the revelations faster than his mind could process them. The world he had known, his comfort, his illusions, the safety of ignorance, had been dismantled in mere minutes. His eyes, once bright and trusting, now shimmered with tears unshed, his lips trembling as he struggled to form words, as though the act of speaking might shatter him completely. Through it all, I stood still, anchored in the moment, one hand resting on Winston's broad, damp head. He pressed against me slightly, offering warmth and reassurance, his eyes alert and steady. I felt no glee, no petty satisfaction. This was not triumph. It was a profound acknowledgement that justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. A grim, unyielding sense of order now permeated the chaos. A silent testimony that the truth cannot be buried forever, no matter how carefully lies are constructed. The weight of the storm, the deceit, the betrayal, and the unspoken pain of years pressing on my chest lifted slightly as I breathed deeply, inhaling the scent of wet pine and earth. There was no joy in witnessing this collapse, only the recognition that integrity and honesty, though battered and tested, ultimately prevail. The foundations of a family built on greed, manipulation, and deception had crumbled like the weakened branches of trees in the wake of a storm, leaving behind the raw, unvarnished truth. David's knees buckled beneath him, and he sank to the ground, mud and leaves clinging to his clothes. His eyes finally found mine, pleading and wide, a silent cry that carried the weight of desperation, regret, and recognition of wrongdoing. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he choked out, the words breaking like fragile glass. I saw the tremor in his lips, the shake in his hands, the vulnerability of a man stripped bare by the consequences of his choices. I just shook my head, unable to speak immediately, my own tears finally breaking free and sliding down my cheeks. Not tears of happiness or relief, but tears born of a long, enduring pain, being met with the profound satisfaction that truth, though late, had finally been seen and acknowledged. I felt the years of quiet endurance, of patience, of injustice endured in silence, coalescing into this singular, cathartic moment. Winston leaned against me, resting his head in the crook of my arm, a living embodiment of loyalty and unconditional love. His warmth grounded me in the midst of the emotional tempest, reminding me that even when people falter, even when greed and deception dominate, bonds built on trust, care, and devotion remain unshakable. The sound of another vehicle approached, a low rumble that cut through the residual tension like a herald of order. I turned my head slightly and saw a park ranger's Jeep rounding the driveway, its tires splashing through puddles left from the night's storm. The vehicle's arrival brought a strange sense of calm, a signal that the chaos now had witnesses and that any further confrontation would be tempered by authority and structure. The ranger stepped out of the Jeep, her movements deliberate and professional. Even at a distance, I could see the calmness in her stance, the steadiness in her gaze. This was someone who had seen storms, literal and figurative, and yet approached every situation with clarity and resolve. She approached, her presence adding a layer of reassurance to the scene, a reminder that the world outside our personal turmoil still contained figures of justice and support. I let David remain on his knees for a few moments longer, letting him absorb the full magnitude of his actions and the consequences they had wrought. Sarah, now collapsed in disbelief, remained unable to form coherent sentences, her mother's sobs punctuating the silence that had begun to settle over the muddy yard. Her father was still rigid, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization, as though piecing together the full scale of deceit for the first time. I placed my hand again on Winston's head, feeling his warmth and the subtle rhythm of his breathing. "We've made it, boy," I whispered softly. "The storm has passed, and the truth stands." There was a deep, resonant peace in that simple statement, a sense that though the night had been long and cruel, the morning had delivered justice, clarity, and the possibility of redemption for those willing to accept it. As the ranger approached, I straightened my posture, standing tall and unwavering. I was drenched, muddy, exhausted, yet strangely unburdened. The storm had tested everything: patience, endurance, love. But here in this fragile, muddy, truth-strewn morning, I knew that the foundations of integrity, loyalty, and perseverance were stronger than any deception, stronger than any betrayal, stronger than the fleeting cruelty of human ambition. And as Winston pressed his head against my hand, his small tail flicking in quiet approval, I felt the first true stirrings of hope in what had been a long, dark night. The reckoning had been delivered, the chaos faced, and now, finally, a sense of possibility, of restoration, and of moving forward began to emerge. The ranger, a young woman with a quiet authority and a presence that immediately calmed the chaos, stepped out of the Jeep. Her uniform was crisp despite the wetness of the morning, and there was a resolute determination in her eyes that reminded me of people I had encountered over the years who handled storms, literal or figurative, with clarity and grace. Officer Miller, she introduced herself, had an aura of quiet confidence, the kind that suggests competence without the need to declare it. I had called her from the satellite phone as a precaution, and now I felt a deep relief wash over me, knowing that she had arrived. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Ednall?" she asked, her tone gentle yet precise, already reading the undercurrents of tension that clung to the air like fog over the Smoky Mountains. Her question was simple, but it carried weight, an implicit acknowledgement that she understood the gravity of what had just transpired. I met her gaze, appreciating the sincerity and steadiness, and nodded. "My guests have overstayed their welcome," I explained, my voice calm, measured, almost like the steady current of a river cutting through the landscape. "Need them escorted off my property." I spoke each word with care, knowing that the truth of the morning, the unraveling of lies, required no embellishment. The storm had passed, leaving clarity and consequence in its wake. I turned slightly, reaching into my pocket and feeling the familiar, comforting bulk of the keys I had carried through the night. Each one represented not just ownership, but the culmination of patience, endurance, and silent perseverance. I walked deliberately over to David, who stood stiffly beside Sarah, his shoulders slumped under the weight of realization and shame. I selected one key and held it out, tossing it gently to him. It landed with a faint clink on the damp ground near his feet. It was the key to their oldest, most battered car, the one that could carry them home, but no longer held any dominion over me. My gesture was deliberate, a mixture of mercy and assertion. David bent to pick it up, his fingers brushing against mine for a brief moment, and I could see the flicker of understanding in his eyes. "The eviction notice for the house will be there when you get back," I said softly, my words calm, unwavering. The legal weight of what I had set into motion now accompanied the emotional reckoning they had endured. A dual force that would ensure the lessons of the morning were not forgotten. I looked at David once more, my eyes meeting his in a moment that carried the weight of everything between us. The love, the disappointment, the heartbreak, and the hope that remained despite the chaos. "As for us, David," I continued, my voice gentle but firm, "we can talk when you decide what kind of man you want to be." There was no scolding in my tone, no accusation that demanded defense. Only the quiet, undeniable expectation that he would confront himself, as I had confronted the storm, as I had endured years of quiet struggle and betrayal, and emerged stronger, more aware, more aligned with the truth. Sarah, now pale and trembling, stared at the ground, her body tense with a mixture of shame and the recognition that every carefully constructed lie had collapsed. Her mother clung to her arm, still sobbing, and her father looked at her with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow that I recognized all too well from my own life's lessons about the fragility of trust and the cost of deceit. The engines of their vehicles roared to life, the sound vibrating through the damp morning air, mingling with the distant calls of birds and the occasional drip of water from the trees above. They drove away in shame, leaving behind the echoes of anger, disappointment, and the unspoken acknowledgement that the world they had tried to manipulate would no longer bend to their will. I turned slowly, feeling the tension in my body begin to ease just slightly, the rigid posture I had held all night softening. My eyes took in the cabin, the structure that had once been a place of retreat, now forever marked by the painful memories and truths it had witnessed. Each window, each beam of wood, seemed to reflect not just the storm outside, but the turbulence that had unfolded within. Winston nudged my hand gently, his broad head pressing into my palm, a living reminder of steadfast loyalty, trust, and love that requires no words. His presence grounded me, reminding me that while human hearts can falter and falter again, bonds built on devotion and truth endure. I knelt slightly to scratch him behind the ears, feeling the dampness of his fur and the reassuring warmth of his body. "What now, boy?" I whispered, the words carrying both exhaustion and hope. He leaned into my touch, his tail wagging softly, as if answering with the simplest, most profound of messages. Whatever comes next, we face it together, grounded in truth and love. The morning light shifted, illuminating the wet grass, the puddles glinting like scattered jewels, and the distant ridges of the Smoky Mountains. A sense of renewal settled over me, subtle but undeniable. The chaos, the lies, the betrayals, all of it had run its course. What remained was clarity, a path forward, and the quiet. Resolute knowledge that we had survived the storm, endured the deception, and emerged with our dignity intact. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, clean air, and let my gaze sweep over the cabin one last time. It would remain a place of memories, some painful, some cathartic, but it would no longer hold power over me. I rose fully, standing tall, and felt the first flickers of true freedom, of a future shaped not by manipulation or greed, but by courage, integrity, and the quiet, unyielding bonds of loyalty that Winston and I shared. The path ahead was uncertain, as all paths are, but the burden of secrecy, the weight of betrayal, had lifted. Winston and I were ready to step forward into whatever new chapter awaited, grounded in the unshakable truth that we were strong enough, brave enough, and faithful enough to endure whatever storms the world might send our way. 6 months had passed since the storm, both literal and emotional, that had reshaped my life. The world felt different now, calmer, quieter, but no less full of purpose. I sat on the porch of my new home, a modest, cozy place nestled closer to town. Its walls weren't grand like the cabin, nor the other house I had owned, but it was mine in a way that felt grounding and real, free from pretense and filled with a sense of peaceful reclamation. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the trees, casting delicate patterns across the wooden planks beneath my feet. Winston lay sprawled at my side, his broad body rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of sleep. Each soft snore reminded me of how far we had come, how we had survived the cruelty and emerged intact, if not stronger. I reached down and ran my fingers through his damp, curly fur, smiling at the simple joy of the moment. Life had a way of stripping away what was unnecessary and forcing you to see the beauty in what remained. The cabin, once a theater of tension and betrayal, was sold, along with the other house that had been at the center of so much pain. The proceeds had been directed towards something meaningful, something that would honor the life we had rebuilt. A significant portion of the money went to fund a new wing at the local animal shelter, named, quite fittingly, the Winston Wing. I volunteered there twice a week, rediscovering the quiet satisfaction of helping creatures who, like me, had known vulnerability and needed protection, love, and care. There was no scheming, no family drama, just the soft fur, gentle purrs, and eager eyes of animals learning to trust again. It was work that healed me as much as it served them. As I traced the rim of my coffee mug with a calloused finger, the mailman approached, delivering the usual stack of envelopes. Among them was a letter with familiar handwriting David's. I hesitated, a lump forming in my throat, before taking it carefully into my hands. It was long, detailed, and heartfelt. Each line bore the weight of a son confronting his failures, unraveling the tangled web of lies and deceit he had allowed to ensnare him. He wrote of therapy sessions, long hours spent at work, and a painstaking effort to make amends, not only financially, by repaying me, but emotionally, by understanding and accepting the consequences of his actions. The words were raw, unpolished, yet sincere, and I felt a profound sense of relief mingled with cautious hope. I folded the letter slowly, taking a deep breath as a single tear slid down my cheek. It wasn't the tears of despair I had cried during that long night in the cabin, nor were they tinged with anger. These were tears of release, of vindication, and of quiet joy. I looked down at Winston, who had stirred slightly at the sound of my breath, his eyes meeting mine with the unwavering devotion that had accompanied me through every hardship. I scratched him behind the ears, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, and whispered, "Well, boy, looks like we're going to be okay." For the first time in a long time, the statement felt entirely true. The morning continued, gentle and unhurried, with the sun climbing higher and warming the small porch. I watched the birds darting between trees, the soft sway of branches, and felt the peace settle into me like a blanket I had forgotten I possessed. It was a peace earned through endurance, clarity, and a willingness to confront pain with courage. The letters, the animals, the simple acts of kindness. I realized then that my purpose was not tied to what others took from me, or the deceit that had once surrounded me. My purpose was in nurturing, protecting, and building something real, something lasting, even if it was small. I rose from my chair, Winston padding loyally at my side, and stepped toward the little garden I had planted earlier that spring. Tiny shoots of green peeked through the soil, resilient and determined, much like us. My hands moved carefully, gently brushing away the dirt to reveal new life, and I felt a swell of pride, not in material wealth, nor in the vindication of justice, but in the quiet, steady triumph of surviving, of protecting what mattered, and of reclaiming agency in my own story. The wind carried a faint hint of flowers blooming nearby, mingling with the earthy aroma of rain-soaked soil. Winston nudged my hand with his nose, his tail wagging softly, as if to say that the future was ours, bright and unshakable. The past remained a shadow, a lesson carved into memory, but it no longer had power over the moments unfolding now, simple and rich with authenticity. I knelt beside him, inhaling the fresh air and feeling the sun warm my back. Life was no longer about enduring cruelty or calculating revenge. It was about small acts of compassion, about giving and receiving love in forms that were pure and steadfast. Every visit to the shelter, every scratch behind Winston's ears, every kind word spoken to another living being became a brick in the foundation of a new existence. One built on empathy, integrity, and the quiet strength of resilience. As I leaned back in my chair, Winston resting his head on my lap, I felt the satisfaction of a story completed, not with bitterness, but with understanding, growth, and renewal. The weight of the past, though still present in memory, no longer dictated the rhythm of my days. The air was clear, the heart unburdened, and the bond between Winston and me a testament to loyalty, love, and enduring companionship. And in that moment, as the morning sun bathed the porch in a golden glow, I felt the full, profound truth of survival and redemption, that even after storms, betrayal, and loss, it is possible to rebuild, to give, and to find joy in life again. The world was vast, and the possibilities were boundless. But the most important thing was here, tangible and steady. Winston by my side, and a heart finally free to love, to care, and to live fully. If you've followed this journey with us, remember that no storm lasts forever, and no betrayal can extinguish your strength. For more stories of courage, resilience, and the quiet triumphs of everyday heroes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue sharing stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul.